Welcome everybody to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. This is a special season dedicated to the tribe of the mother, but also I know any mothers listening will find this extremely valuable. I've created each episode to offer simple, digestible, and supportive information, which I hope will educate and inspire anyone who listens. So this is by popular demand. Please help us to educate and support the tribe holding the mother. Look forward to passionate and highly knowledgeable guests dedicated to reclaiming the essence of birth and embracing conscious parenting. Throughout our time together, our guests will serve as the guiding voices, illuminating the path towards a deeper understanding of preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. This is with the mother and the baby being the center of the exploration. In the show notes, you'll discover the link to Nourished Mother package, which will offer many different resources to complement each episode. This is free for all members in the Women's Circle, or £33 for everybody who just wants to purchase the package. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guests and immense gratitude to my partner for supporting me on this creation. And finally, last but not least, special thank you to Araya, my daughter, for being the endless well of inspiration. Welcome everybody, I'm your host Danielle. I am so excited to share today's episode with Dr. Stu, who probably you know already if you're listening to this podcast. We had a beautiful conversation 2 years ago. I can't believe it was 2 years ago. So I was so honored that he came back on to join us. Dr. Stu is known for his significant impact on twin and breech home birth education. With over 30 years of experience, he blends traditional medicine training with a deep appreciation for holistic birth practices. In 2004, he co-authored the book Fearless Pregnancy, Wisdom and Reassurance from a Doctor, a Midwife and a Mum. He has spoken internationally on breech and twin births and the right of informed decision-making. He has appeared in many documentaries, including More Business of Being Born, Happy Healthy Child, Reducing Infant Mortality, and Heads Up, The Disappearing Art of Vaginal Breech Delivery. He recently stopped practicing community-based birthing and now travels around the world sharing his knowledge and teaching skills to birth workers. And he also has an incredible podcast, Birthing Instincts, which he co-hosts with midwife Bliss Young. And he's constantly creating content for his private community on Patreon. All of his information I will leave in the show notes. In today's conversation, I asked Dr. Stu about his North Star. What inspires him day after day to show up to do the work that he does? And I go on to ask him about breech births. And we go on to talk about breech births. So we're talking about different types of presentations of breech birth, the risks associated, and latest research. So if you are someone who is pregnant right now and you've been told that your baby is breech, maybe you're supporting somebody, or maybe you're just really curious of what to do in this situation, Dr. Stu is sharing the information that we need to ask the questions that will support us on our journey so that we can find and receive the best care. And with this comes the turning of our awareness onto the medical system and the training that they receive for breech birth. And as Dr. Stu always says, this is just a variation of normal. And if you've ever listened to Dr. Stu, you know he's not afraid to challenge the system, to challenge our beliefs, to challenge the resources that we are receiving. And I love in this conversation how he brings up the power of storytelling, how sharing our stories can challenge and transform the medical norms and beliefs. When you sit with another human being, you listen to their story, you feel them, you listen to them, you feel their emotions, and you hold space for that. Remembrance can happen, awakenings can happen, healing can happen. I hope that you love this conversation as much as I did. And just a quick reminder, we have our next circle, which is live on Zoom on the 29th of September. We have 2 events happening to accommodate different time zones, 10 a.m. UK, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And we'll be exploring our subconscious beliefs and ideas and connection to our womb. If your menstrual cycle is irregular, absent, or you're no longer bleeding, then we'll be looking at how we can bring these practices into the different phases of the moon so we can tune into our cyclical nature. The cycle is donation based, and there is a recording that is available if you cannot make it. Before we go into this conversation, let's take a deep breath together. Feeling the body expand as you inhale and soften as you exhale. Let your awareness scan your body for any unnecessary tension, and let that next exhale melt any unnecessary tension in the body. Welcome in softness. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Dr. Stu. This is our second time sitting together. And as you just told me, it's been 2 years. I cannot believe that. Wow. So what's been happening for you over this last 2 years?
Well, most of what I'm doing now is not birthing. I've done a few, but that's not what I do mostly now. Mostly I'm doing consulting virtually. There's the one good thing that came out of the pandemic, I believe, was virtual communication. I mean, it's not the best thing. Obviously, I'm a face-to-face fan. Sometimes I'm asked to give a lecture that's going to be played in another country, and I have to talk to my computer as if it's an audience. And it's one thing I just don't like very much. I really like seeing faces and making people, either they're nodding or they're nodding off, but you get to see what's happening. And then I've been going around the world, and I've been teaching breech and twin skills and an understanding of, sort of why they've disappeared, why most physicians and most medical institutions are very obtuse when it comes to bringing it back, even though the literature strongly supports it. And specifically now on twins, most recently, I think when I spoke to you last, I don't think we had submitted a paper for publication, but my colleague Reassurance, who runs Breech Without Borders, and I are publishing our second paper, and will be on the experience of 100 sets of twins that came into my care in the home birth setting. And it's been a long process to get it through peer review, but it's resubmitted now, and hopefully that'll be coming out in 2024. So I've got that to look forward to. But I go around the world and I teach the skills that are necessary in order to provide women the choices that they deserve. And unfortunately, mostly only midwives are the ones that are coming to the seminars. We get an occasional OB, but not very many. But I think it's changing. I think the pressure is because you asked me before we came on, what's changing, and I think maybe it's only because I live in my little box on social media, and all I do see are the posts from people that are like-minded, like you and me. But I just get a sense that it's spreading. You're not seeing it statistically yet, and of course, statistics don't necessarily mean something. It depends on who's collecting them, and they tend to lag behind as far as how many women are choosing not to go through the hospital medicalized induction C-section model and are looking at alternatives. But I think that the education is out there now, and women are beginning to challenge the established medical consensus. And just because something is a consensus doesn't mean it's right. And for many things in medicine, we have lost the trust of the population. And I would say that like 5, 6, 7 years ago, the medical profession was looked on much more with much more reverence than it is now. I mean, I think between the pandemic and what's being exposed about the birth world and other things like that, and the medications that we're taking, and I mean, if you just look back at the history of medicine, it's been a series of blunders, one after the other, and some may be accidental, but many of them are probably intentional. And once you break trust with somebody, it's really hard to get it back. And the medical profession, I think, as it is right now, it has done a very poor job. And there's reasons to distrust the medical profession. And when I keep saying women are waking up, I mean, families are waking up. I mean, men are waking up too, but my profession is mainly dealing with women and their families. So that's what I would say. But men are waking up. And so everybody's waking up and beginning to challenge things and looking to maybe get back to a more natural way of living. a
Mm,
healthier way of living, changing the way we eat, changing our activity level, changing the water that we drink. I mean, here in the United States, a lot of communities still have fluoridated water, and fluoride is a toxin. It's a heavy metal toxin, and it's not something that should be in the water, and yet it is. And this is like a lead into the question of why. And so these are the things that I talk about when I go and I talk. And what happens is it's not just a 2-day seminar from me. It becomes a back and forth storytelling
mm,
um, love fest, basically.
mm,
And what's great about it is the best way to remember and to learn things is not to read it from a book or have someone lecture you. It's to tell stories.
mm,
And that's why it's so important for us to be seeing the birth stories that are being posted now on social media. And yes, there's some tragedies. Of course, there will always be. But the empowered stories that you're seeing now are fantastic. And I, I, I think it's so necessary because we haven't done well. And I'd like to
mm.
see us do better before I go off to next my next post in the world. Right. Yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And it's so true. Hearing the stories is such a powerful step for reclaiming this because I've been sharing birth stories on the podcast for a while, and a lot of these, like, I've only had my one experience, and I've maybe heard stories from my family, which are very much they had they gave birth in the system. So I'm in this little bubble, and by hearing these stories, I guess just get to open up and see how there is other experiences that I had, and there's other ways that women are being treated, whether they see that as a positive thing or not. And just by holding the space and listening and receiving them stories, it just reminds me of how we would have been back in the day when women would have been sat together, like healing together in postpartum together, giving birth together, seeing all these different kinds of experiences. So thank you so much for sharing that point. And I'm also curious to how things might have changed in the way that you're presenting this work. Do you feel like there is a greater understanding of physiological birth now as you're stepping to these presentations?
Well, I'm speaking to a skewed audience. I mean, everyone that comes to my seminars is somebody that's obviously already interested and already sort of thinks this way. It's unusual for me to get into like a residency program and speak to somebody who's never heard someone like me speak before. So, but yeah, I think the demand is going up. And what I love about it is that sometimes we even get just lay people, mothers and families that want to come, or doulas
Mm,
that want to come. Uh, and we get midwives who want to come, even if they work in a country or a state where it's not legal for them to do breech birth or twin birth out of the hospital setting. And
mm,
so they want to know the skills because not only one do they want to know just in case something were to ever happen, but a surprise breech. You don't see surprise twins much anymore because of ultrasound. Before the era of ultrasound, 50% of twins were diagnosed in labor, which which could,
wow.
I just can't imagine like, oh, there's another baby coming out, that
Hello.
sort of thing. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, they're coming
Experience.
into not only to learn the skills because it might happen, but also because they want to counsel uh, the families so that the
Mm,
families can then go to their medical practitioner and advocate for things and have information so they don't get snowballed
yes,
or
yeah.
gaslit to be told things that they know aren't true. So many women go to the doctor and the doctor tells them things, and how does the woman know what the doctor's telling them is true?
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, a large percentage of what they tell you isn't necessarily the only way to do things. It may not be totally untrue. Something bad could happen, but the idea that that's the first place you go is a problem uh, for making it through your pregnancy in a good frame of mind because you're constantly seeded with fear and anxiety. And then once that seed is planted, it's very, very hard to get rid of it.
Mm,
It's their infestors for the 9 months, and not only is it bad for the mom, but the hormone she's making maybe not so good for the baby either.
mm,
Pregnancy should be a time of bliss and settling and nesting and resting and love and getting excited about uh, what the future holds. I mean, I know from my own personal experience as a father, and I know also from talking to women all my professional life, that the minute that you find out that you're pregnant, your whole life just changes in front of you. You already see that baby riding a bicycle and
mm,
going to college. And so, in the tragic periods where you miscarry and things like that, that's a loss nonetheless. And in the medical treatment just sort of treats it like a mechanical thing, like you need an oil change or your carburetor's broken and we have to just fix it and just move on. But we get a replacement part and move on. It doesn't work that way. And the
mm.
medical system doesn't allow the time for relationships to develop, um, and the midwifery model does. And I think that women are understanding that, and if they're not, they're losing something. And
Yes.
I hope that your podcast, my podcast, thank God for podcasts. Thank God for
Yes.
having
Yeah.
social media platforms now where people like you and me 15, 20 years ago, maybe we would have had a blog and like six people would have read our
Yeah,
blog.
like my mum would have read it, if
Right.
that.
Yeah, that's true. But now we can reach a lot of people and it's permanently out there. And so
Yes.
people are just scrolling or searching the internet. Things like this are going to come up and they're going to watch and then they're going to start to scratch their head and think, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I should look into this more. Maybe I should seek out a midwife next time and at least have a conversation with her
Yes.
before I just succumb to whatever policy or program or insurance card I have that tells me I have to go here and I have to do this. And we've talked about this before, that it's a sacred thing in your life, and it shouldn't be something that you defer to a third party as to how you're going to manage your birth.
Mm,
You should be able, I mean, again, it could be expensive. Obviously, having a child is not cheap. So you should be thinking about that before you even consider getting pregnant. But to scrimp on the part where you're pregnant and bringing the child into the world is probably not a wise decision.
I feel like podcasts are one of my favorite things for exploring different points of view and having different ideas on things because I didn't have a breech birth, and I don't know anyone apart from people that I've recorded episodes with on the podcast with their birth story. So with a breech, if a family's been told your baby is breech, what does this mean? What's the different types of positions that the baby can be in?
Well, breech just means your baby has chosen to come down a different way. And most of the time, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your baby or wrong with you or wrong with your uterus or wrong with the world. It's just one of those things that happens about 3 to 4% of all pregnancies at term. It's much higher earlier in pregnancy. Um, but at term, it's about 3 to 4% of babies that choose to come down breech. And there are different, without getting too technical, the baby that's coming bum first is called a frank breech, and a baby that's coming with its bum and its feet or legs crossed underneath it or alongside is called a complete breech. And then you have something called an incomplete breech where one leg is up by the face, like in frank breech, and one leg is folded down low. And all three of those are perfectly fine if other criteria are met to safely deliver vaginally. But women wouldn't know that because for the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a push towards cesarean section for breech. And there's been some papers that came out that supported that decision, but those papers were refuted and flawed. And if you look overall at the literature on breech, as I have done it extensively, um, it's pretty straightforward that the safety of breech birth is well documented. And if you look at numbers from even, again, I don't want to get too stuck in the weeds because I love just talking about the beauty of the whole thing with you, but just for some quick numbers, The risk, the risk of breech birth that everyone's scared of is that, the head will get stuck and the baby will die. This is the thing that's said over and over again by doctors who don't understand breech or are just trying to skew their counseling to get someone into the schedule a cesarean section, which is much easier and expeditious for them. Um, but the Royal College of OBGYN has the best numbers on this. And I mean, the American College doesn't even list numbers, but the Royal College has numbers in something called their Green Top Guidelines from 2017, which look at the rate of neonatal death from breech birthing and also from head down birthing. And what they do is they make this false comparison. They compare a vaginal breech birth to a cesarean for breech birth. And that's a false comparison. What you really need to do is compare a vaginal breech birth to a head down vaginal birth. And what's the difference? And the morbidity listed, and these numbers are rounded, obviously, for a baby who's head down at term in an otherwise uncomplicated situation. The risk of neonatal death is about 1 in every 1,000 babies. You're going to lose one. And that's just nature. That's just the way it is. It's not anybody's fault. It's not negligent. Sometimes it might be, but it's not negligence or malpractice or anything. That just happens sometimes. And the risk for a breech baby having a neonatal death at term vaginally is about 2 in 1,000. So the risk is actually just one extra baby in every 1,000 that is going to be lost. Now, some people hear that information and they say, that's too much, I want a cesarean. But then you should know the risk with a cesarean is 1 in every 2,000 births. Okay, so it's about 4 times higher with a vaginal breech birth than a cesarean for breech birth, but they're still extremely small numbers, because if you look at the chance of it not happening, with a vaginal breech birth, it's 99.8% chance it won't happen. With a head down vaginal birth, it's 99.9% chance it won't happen. And with a cesarean for breech, it's 99.95% chance it won't happen. So if you ask the average person, what's the difference between 99.8, 99.9, and 99.95, they're going to say not much. But because of that extra 1 in 1,000 losses, the medical model has decided we're going to section all breeches, which makes no sense whatsoever, because that gets down to the thing that we talked about last time, I think briefly, which is all that really matters to them is having a live baby in the bassinet. And what they don't look at is the cost to the mother from having a cesarean birth, the cost, the effects on the baby, and the effects on the mother's future babies. And we're going, oh, that'll go, that's a whole nother topic, but that's the whole thing about breech. So when someone finds out their breech at term, and we'll get to that, the first thing they need to know is it's just a variation of normal. And there are skilled practitioners around the world. There aren't a lot of us. That's what Breech Without Borders is trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do with my Reteach Breech seminars. But we're trying to increase the number of practitioners out there who can provide these services to women, because they deserve that choice. And so sometimes women are going to have to do a lot of work, when at a time when they're supposed to be just, wrapping up, getting ready, that last few weeks, you're just hopefully in a blissful state of mind. And now you have stresses, you have things that you have to do, you have work to do. And you have to find out things, and you may have to go out of network, or you may have to travel to a different part of your country to find the right practitioner. But if you want more children, and this is your first pregnancy, and if you want more children, if it's your second or third and you want more children, doing a cesarean section for that breech, all it does is it moves the risk that you saved from that baby, that 1 in extra 1,000, and it moves it to future babies, because now you have the scarred uterus VBAC issue. So no one's really thinking downstream. Everybody, I have a big thing when I talk, give my talks, I talk about stage 1 thinking. And stage 1 thinking is thinking about doing something because it feels good or it sounds good, but not actually asking yourself the ultimate question, does it actually do good? What's the long-term consequences? And then what happens? Because that if you did that, then you'd have to look at what a lot of things that are being done. We'll just stick with medicine right now, but a lot of things being done in medicine are stage one thinking. They don't look downstream. Let's just vaccinate everybody with an experimental substance, right? Without any studies, without anything. Let's give it to pregnant women, give it to babies, 6-month-old babies. I mean, we would never do that. It's never been done in the history to do experimental things on pregnant women and babies, and yet they're doing it. So it's the same sort of thing here. They decided that they didn't want to do breech delivery, and I wasn't privy to their conversations at the American College of OBGYN and all these other Royal Colleges and all these other places back in the late 20th century, when, prior to like the 1970s and 80s, breech was just considered a variation of normal. As a matter of fact, we as residents look forward to when a woman was breech, and we used to fight over who get to take that woman because we wanted to do the breech deliveries because they were fun. They were fun to do. And if you think of something as fun, then you don't fear it. And we've now had 2 generations of doctors who've been trained to fear it. And once you have plant those seeds of fear, as I said earlier, in the woman, now you're planting the seeds of fear in the doctors. It's hard to get rid of that. It's very hard to get rid of it. So a woman who finds out she's breech, first of all, if you find out you're breech at like 32 weeks, don't even worry about it. If you wanted to start doing some stuff that isn't going to drive you crazy, there's some simple things that you can do. Again, at 32 weeks, very likely the baby will turn. Remember, 96 to 97% of babies by 36 to 37 weeks are going to be head down. So, you can wait a little bit longer before you start to get anxious about it. But, if you have choices, then there's no reason to get anxious about it. And the women that were in my practice, I had several women who had breech babies with their first baby who were give birth with me, who turned out to have breech with their second babies. And, they had a joyful pregnancy because they didn't have to worry about their baby being breech. If their baby chose to be breeched, it's fine. So there are things to do, like you can go to a website called spinningbabies.com, and they have exercises and things that you can do and positions. And you can go see your chiropractor. And there's a technique called Webster technique that most chiropractors know. And then there's acupuncture with moxibustion. But again, starting to do all these things, it's going to start to drive you crazy, especially if you have to drive here and to drive there and to drive over here. So, I wouldn't worry about it too much at all.
Why do you think the babies, sorry, I was just going to ask before you go on, like, why do you think the babies move into this position? Because if they're in this position, I would be moving towards thinking maybe they like it. And then with these exercises and other practices, how would that affect the baby?
Well, the only reason, I was going to say this, the only reason to do these things is because of lack of choices. So if I have a woman who's in my practice from early on, and it turns out she's breech at 32, 34, 36 weeks, that's fine. We didn't do any of this stuff because there was no reason to. There are only 2 reasons in Los Angeles when I was practicing for a woman to do that. One is a lack of choices, or 2 was that if this baby stayed breech, it was going to cost her more money because she'd have to hire me. Because in California, midwives, even though they're skilled and trained in breech delivery, the brilliant men and women in Sacramento have decided that they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So I'll leave this cynicism aside. So yeah, and so why do babies choose to be breech? Well, sometimes they just do. Some people think there's something neurologically different about some of them. And the only reason they think that I remember is that there was a study that looked at the coils in the umbilical cord. And babies with breeches tend to have less coiled umbilical cords, which means that when they were littler, they weren't spinning around as much. They weren't flipping from position to position. So maybe there's something neurologically different. But they've looked at those babies, and at 2 years of age, they find no evidence of any neurologic detectable differences, intellectual differences, anything. So who knows what that is. So some people think it's an innate issue. Sometimes it's a uterine issue. The uterus has an anomaly in it, like a septum. A lot of people don't like the word anomaly. they would call it a variation, but it is, anomaly doesn't have to be a pejorative word. It just means it's not the norm. Okay. So breech itself could be listed as an anomaly because it's not the norm. So don't take that word to heart. But the uterus could have a septum, she could have a double uterus, those sorts of things. Those are small percentage. Hi there, hon.
She's coming in for a bit of milk.
That's perfect.
We're still going.
Perfectly fine. Even if it was my show, it'd be perfectly fine, but it's your show. And sometimes some babies will have an anatomic abnormality that makes them want to stay breech. Now, that's a problem, and that's a problem for vaginal delivery. And those are some of the guidelines of who can have a safe breech delivery. That doesn't, again, these are guidelines that even, dedicated breech practitioners believe are reasons that a cesarean section would be a better choice and would not support a woman having a baby with an anomaly like hydrocephalus, which is too big, too much fluid in the head, or something called torticollis, which is a very rare thing where there's a spasm in the sternocleidomastoid muscle of your neck and the baby's head is extended backwards. Breech babies have to be able to flex their head as they deliver because it's the last movement that they do to deliver, which is interesting because it's the opposite movement of a head down baby. The head down baby's the second to last cardinal movement is called a head extension, and then they externally rotate. But with breech babies, the last cardinal movement is the head flexes to come out. So a baby that can't flex its head should not be having a vaginal delivery. A baby with a major anomaly of the spine or the abdominal wall should probably not be having a vaginal delivery, whether it's breech or head down. Those babies should be probably born by cesarean section. So those are some of the criteria. Do you want me to go through the criteria that I use?
Yes, I would love for you to do that.
Okay, for the home birth world, there are 9 criteria that I use, and hopefully I can remember them all right now, okay? First one has to be term. But I will make a caveat to that and say that breech birth down to babies that are like 1,500 grams, which is only 3 pounds and 5 ounces, the world literature supports vaginal breech birth in those babies if they meet the other criteria. But of course, at home, we don't really want to be doing premature babies. So it's 36 weeks and above, 35 and a half weeks and above. Now, some states and some countries have laws where midwives can only do things at 37 weeks and beyond. But there's no reason that a woman who's 35 and a half weeks couldn't have a home breech birth. And if the baby had a little bit of issue with breathing afterwards, and we couldn't, we couldn't fix that, you could take the baby to the hospital, but the mom could at least have the option of a vaginal delivery at home, whereas the hospital probably would have sectioned her for that. So term, frank breech or complete breech or even incomplete breech. All right. No gross anomalies, a flexed head, which we talked about. Estimated fetal weight, we sort of have to have guidelines. So my estimated fetal weight is somewhere between 5 and 9.5 pounds. But if I had a baby that I thought was 4.5 pounds or a baby that I thought was 10 pounds, would I not give them a chance to deliver? No, of course I would. Because if you can get the body out, the head will come out almost always. Again, sometimes there are problems where the head doesn't come out as easily, and that's why training is necessary. If the head just followed the body, then anyone could do it. So training is necessary. But if you have the proper training, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a problem with the head. And some people think, well, the head is bigger than the rest of the body, it comes out last. That's actually not true. If you take a tape measure and you go around the baby's butt and 2 thighs, or even 1 thigh, you'll find that circumference is actually greater than the head. And so those of you who have a newborn baby at home, go ahead and take a tape measure and do it and see what you come up with. Let me know if I'm wrong. But that's typically the way it is. So let's see. That's 5. Number 6 is, let's see. I'm going to forget one. Mom shouldn't have any medical problems. I think maybe that's the one. I mean, mom, she shouldn't be having preeclampsia, that sort of thing. Okay. And then labor needs to start spontaneously at home. We don't induce labors at home, but inducing a breech labor in the hospital with a skilled practitioner is perfectly fine. No reason you can't do that. We just don't do it in the home setting. Um, that doesn't mean we don't do things like castor oil or that sort of thing, but I'm talking about true induction with Cytotec or with Pitocin, that sort of thing. Obviously, we don't do that at home. A no-brainer is that both mom and baby have to tolerate labor. So if mom is having problems in labor, she's hypotensive, or she becomes really hypertensive, or some other problem, or she starts bleeding heavily, or baby's heart rate isn't something that you're comfortable with, then that's not a reason. That's a reason not to stay home. Of course, that's obvious. And then the last one is technically the parents have to have the right mindset, and this is true for all birthing.
Yeah.
The woman has to be confident in her body, in her team. The husband has to be on board. Any of her support people, she has to have the right support people around her, not the negative naysayer people. And again, that can happen in the hospital too. You can be surrounded by the wrong people, and that destroys the whole ambiance of what a birth should be like. Because as Sarah Buckley likes to say, birth should be quiet, safe, and unobserved. And it's very hard to have that in a hospital setting. The hospital has protocols and policies that have to be done, or the nurse is going to get in trouble if she doesn't do them. And a lot of these things are not done for the sake of the mother, they're done for the sake of the institution. And just, again, one little cynical point is that almost everything the hospital does has a code that they can use to bill for and to increase the revenue that they get from your labor. So again, another flaw in the system is that it incentivizes interventions and incentivizes things to do. I mean, doctors may get a little more money for a cesarean for a breech, but they save a lot of time because they can be in at 7:30 in the morning on a Tuesday and be out by 8:15 and back in their office by 9. Whereas if you have a breech in labor, a lot of hospitals are going to say, well, if you're going to do that, then you have to be here. So you end up spending 9 hours at the hospital for the same pay that you would have gotten if you'd been in and out in 45 minutes earlier that day.
Sickening.
Right.
I can
Yeah,
feel like my stomach turning. Like I know how it works, but it's still, whenever it comes into conversation, it's just like, wow, it's really hard to believe still. And I think that's where a lot of people still are. It's hard to believe that this manipulation is happening because of money and all the other things that come into that. I heard recently that in the US you have to pay to have the baby on your chest after birth. Is that true? I'm from England, so I don't know.
They're apparently the person doesn't have to pay, but apparently there's a code for that, and the hospital can then bill the insurance company for that. People that pay out of pocket will usually actually save a lot of money. Actually, if you negotiate with your hospital, what's your cash price? This is a different topic.
Yeah.
But in my country, if say they bill the insurance $18,000 for your vaginal delivery, they may accept like $3,000 cash from you. All right.
Oh, you can do some dealing.
But you need to find out ahead of time. This is not something to be trying to negotiate while your wife is in labor.
No.
At that point, you need to get this down ahead of time. Because,
oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, talk about subtle or even overt coercion. It's hard when she's there, it's hard to start negotiating for prices, but
trying to sweet talk the doctor.
Yeah, they have ridiculous codes. And again, there's this, all the incentives are backwards for breech delivery. And as they are for many other things, but for breech delivery and twin delivery too, but they're backwards. Like I just said, the doctors, for expediency and extra money, the hospital makes a lot more money if you have a C-section for your breech than if you have a vaginal delivery for your breech. 2 to 2.5 times as much money is what's billed. I don't know what they collect. Well, often what they bill and what they collect has no connection whatsoever, because a lot of these things are negotiated ahead of time. They have, they negotiate with the big insurance companies or what's called Medicaid in the United States, which is government-sponsored healthcare. So there's negotiated rates, and that's not even a fair term. It's not really a negotiated rate. Here's the negotiation. Here's the rate we're going to pay you, take it.
Right.
That's the negotiation. Now, if you're a big hospital system, you have some clout. But if you're an individual doctor or a small practice, you can't go to Blue Cross and say, you're only paying us this much for this. We want this much more. They'll say, no, sorry, bye. Because their job is not to provide a wide variety of choices to their subscribers.
Right.
Their job is to just make money.
Wow.
And if you
Yes.
think of it that way, the same thing with a hospital. And I understand that the hospital needs to keep its doors open. I've had this dilemma that's come up this last 6 months or so with I've been arguing with myself about, I would like to see more and more normal births leave the hospital setting and deliver at home or at freestanding birth centers. That's what I think is, or somebody come up with an alternative where they have birthing, not even calling them centers or birthing hospitals, birthing places, like the farm, only maybe even a little bit more medicalized, where they have a little bit of alternative things there, just in case. But if you do that, if you start taking the normal births out of the hospital, but we need the hospitals for the births that have a problem, for those rare transports, or for the women that develop complications early in pregnancy and need to be hospitalized. And hospitals do great work with those women. But if they're not making money off of the normal women, not that the other women aren't normal. I have to be so careful with language these days.
Oh, I know.
But no, with the women who are not having a problem, they take those out of the hospital. The hospital can't make enough money. They're going to close their OB departments. And in my country, I don't know about yours, but in my country, we're having this term of maternity care desert has become, more and more commonly used because we're seeing more and more obstetrical units closing in hospitals where women now have to drive, instead of 5 to 10 miles to their hospital, they'll have to drive 50 to 200 miles to the nearest hospital. And, depends if you're in Wyoming in the mid-January and there's a snowstorm, you don't have that option. So
So this is like the unraveling of this. This is also the consequences, and probably skills will start to be lost in the hospital, I imagine, if all they're seeing is emergency births.
Well, that's all they treat everybody like that anyway.
Right. I know this is like what you're trying to bring back, but
yeah, but it's a problem because you're not going to get the hospitals to suddenly become more home-like. That whole thing, there was a push for that a while back, and it was one of the dumber slogans ever, was we just need to make hospitals more like home. And it's like, you can't do that. It's not about curtains and hardwood floors and chandeliers. It's about about how you manage or how you don't manage, how you leave a woman alone and not bother her and not make her get into a car way too early to come to the hospital and only to find that she's in early labor. And now you've got her there and it's like, well, you're here. You might as well stay. We'll start an IV, we'll put you on the monitor. Oh, your contractions aren't very strong. And then the whole cascade of interventions begins. So, I mean, we went from a C-section rate 50 years ago of 5%. And it's now 32% in my country. I just saw the English stats from 2023, 39%. In England, which everybody thought had a better maternity care system because they used to incorporate midwives, and midwives could work at home and come to the hospital and have continuity of care. But from what I understand from my British friends, that there's been budget cuts. And of course, first thing that gets cut is not the administration. First thing that gets cut are the people that are actually doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's typical. That I've seen that throughout history, where they never fire themselves. They always fire the people that are more valuable than themselves. The administration, that's the nature of administration. Only gets heavier.
It's a business.
Yeah. That's why when Elon Musk came in and fired 80% of his staff and Twitter didn't skip a beat, really, it just told you that they're a little bit heavy in administration, don't you think? Right.
Oh my gosh, yes, I know. So I am curious too, when you are doing this work, when you're sharing all this information, do you have a lot of families come in who are preparing for a home birth and are choosing not to have any ultrasound scans, like they're doing the whole, like, as we'll know on social media, like a free birth? and they're not having anyone around during the birth, but they want to make sure that, you know, if they have a breech birth, if that's what's happening, that they can support themselves. So I'm curious, like, how that looks from your side, if you've been supporting families.
Well, I'm not currently practicing right now. I stopped practicing right around the time we had our podcast last
Oh,
time
wow. What did I do?
April of 2022. Yeah, was I on the road yet when we had that podcast? Was I in my RV heading
No, you weren't.
east?
I
Oh,
don't think
so
so.
it's just
No.
before. It was probably just before. We probably recorded it before it came out. That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, we did. We recorded it probably late 2021 or something like that, or maybe. Um, so I'm not currently practicing. I will say, however, that uh, as a practitioner who still can't get quite all of the medicalized training that I had out of me, I can't openly, honestly say that I'm a big fan of free birthing. Now, for multiparous women, it's a different story. For first-time moms, it's something that's a little bit sketchier because there are difference in numbers and difference in outcomes between what are called primips and multips. For head down babies, breech babies, twin babies, it's always there's different numbers, different success rates, different cesarean section rates, different complication rates, that sort of thing. But so a woman who's going to do a free birth with no interventions, then she has to be fully understanding that she's taking a risk. And that's a decision that she's entitled to make.
Mm.
It's not a decision for the state to make. It really isn't. And yet you see some overzealous prosecutors will go after a woman who has a free birth where the outcome is bad. You know, again, this may be controversial to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I never really shy away from that sort of thing.
It's you.
But if that woman who had a free birth who had a bad outcome, if some prosecutor may go after her, but in many of states in my country, if you chose to abort that baby, it'd be just fine. So think about that for a second.
Yeah.
All right. It's the woman's decision in one case to do whatever she wants. And in another case, she's criminal if she does whatever she wants. It's like, woo, it's like, try to figure, try to get the logic behind the thinking.
Yeah.
And whether you're pro-abortion or, I mean, pro-choice or pro-life, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. It's the logic of the argument that I'm talking about.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and we see this in a lot of things. We see states in my country that say a woman can choose to have a home birth if she wants to, but if someone skilled wants to come and help her, that's a felony.
That's what they say in some states there.
There are a few states here where midwifery is illegal.
Oh, wow. Right.
So in other words, if a woman wants to birth at home, they don't see what I believe is that the legislators don't have the balls to ban home birthing because then they piss off 50% of the, well, 50% of the population and probably 70% of the voting population, which are women. So they do that. So how do they do it? They do it passively. They say, oh yeah, you can have a home birth, but you just can't have anybody there skilled to help you.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
You could have your mom there, you could have a taxi driver there.
But no professional.
But no professional, correct. Right. And there are countries that are very much like that, where home birth is banned altogether. I don't know all 180 some countries in the world, but I know a country like Armenia, home birth is illegal. So yet there's starving for information there. I've done 2 virtual lectures there through the Michelle O'Donnell motherhood organization there. And they all want to know about breech birth and twin birthing. Yet, they can't help them outside of a hospital setting. And midwifery is not even allowed in Armenia, from what I understand.
Wow. So this is like they're holding on to the dream, hopefully, that they can recall it back. So to continue to have the skills and everything that they need to know.
They're advocating to change the legal system in their country and again, getting lawyers involved in everything. It's just I don't know where that started. Did it started in Britain? Did it started in the United States? I don't know who started the whole idea of lawyers, but Shakespeare was right.
What did he say?
But he said, first kill all the lawyers.
Oh, okay. A very simple statement.
Yes, that's what he said.
I thought it would be more poetic.
I don't remember which play it's in, but if you Google first kill all the lawyers, it'll tell you which play that was in that Shakespeare wrote that. I can't remember. I used to know these things. I have so much in my head.
You have a lot of
that, like,
information in that.
Yeah, I liken it to like a garage, a messy garage. You know it's in there, but you just don't know where it is. Right.
That's
It's in
why I
there
love
somewhere.
listening to your podcast, because I find you're talking about something and then you'll move something in your garage and you'll reveal something else and then you'll start talking about it. And yeah, I learned so much. I feel like I'm at university when I listen to your podcast. So thank you for
Yeah, there's
that.
just a lot in there. And again, as you get older, you get a little bit slower in recalling things, and it's noticeable,
Yeah.
you know.
There's just
So I'm trying to live a healthier lifestyle. I'm trying to detox from heavy metals and stuff that, I don't drink tap water anymore. I don't drink bottled water anymore. Unless if I'm out and I have to buy a bottle of water, I will. But otherwise, I bought filters for my home, and I'm hoping that I haven't been,
scammed.
scammed. Yeah. By those filter
I know
companies.
we have to blind trust some things, don't we? Otherwise, we're just not going to drink anything.
Yeah, we'll probably find out in 20 years that the filters are toxic.
Probably.
So
But
who
that's all
knows?
the other side of this as well, I suppose, of like, if a mother is having a breech birth, how healthy her body is as a baseline. Like, what is the nutrients is she getting? Like, what toxins are inside? It's all this whole of a layer. So because we're doing this podcast from preconception onwards, right now, preconception, it's really getting into these bits that let's look at this before we get pregnant. Like, what are we eating? Like, where are we getting our water from? Like, what are these pollutions? Because it can sound like a lot to talk about, but that is because there's so much crap everywhere. So it's like, first of all, for ourselves as a family, we're realizing what world we're living in and what can we do in this moment. Like, instead of just being afraid all the time, it's like, what changes can we make now and what are we moving towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts in basically being healthy. I mean, if you look at our children right now, and I'm speaking around the world, we have the unhealthiest children in the history of man, in the history of written history right now. And we have all the luxuries and all the advances of science and medicine and technology, and our kids are only getting more unhealthy. And by unhealthy, I mean unhealthy. I mean chronic diseases in children, autoimmune diseases in children have risen dramatically. From the early 80s, it was probably a single digits in my country. Now it's over 50% of children, supposedly. This is what I've read from relatively reliable sources. Again, finding a source that's reliable these days is also a difficult thing.
Yeah.
But it's over 50% now of children who have chronic diseases. Now, is that from vaccines? Is it from 5G? Is it from glyphosate, which is in our foods? Is it from pesticides? Is it from heavy metals? Is it from how we give birth and how the microbiome affects us at the very beginning? Is it from how we're growing inside our mother and what our mother is eating? Is it from what's in our mother's body before we're even conceived? All these things have changed over the last 50 years, and we've seen this rise. Now, can you point to any single one of those? Yeah, I can probably, but I won't. I don't want to get too much in trouble. I don't want you to get censored. So, but I think a lot of it has to do with heavy metals and toxins in our environment, and nobody seems to care about fixing those. Nobody. They see this is really sinister, and this is not where I wanted to go with this, but there's no money to be made whatsoever in healthy people. So having unhealthy people leads to more profit for the people that benefit from that, and that would be the hospital systems, that would be the big pharmaceutical companies, and that's a way to control the population. So governments will benefit from you being unhealthy as well, because then they can mandate things and they can control you. So no one's trying to solve the problem. And what we're doing is we're treating the symptoms. And there's so many good practitioners out there I've learned from, the Zach Bushes of the world. The other, there are so many people. I don't want to leave anybody out. Paul Thomas is another one that talk about looking at the root causes of these problems. and not just treating the symptoms, but finding out what's causing it. Like, why do we have a rise so greatly in the last 30 years of diabetes? I mean, well, it's not even a question of why, but no one seems to care about fixing why. They just are happy to come up with new medications for it, or obesity. I mean, there's no money in not giving Ozempic.
Big shout out to our sponsor, Evolving Humans, who are the pioneers for energy healing. This practice that I was taught 4 years ago has been studied by researchers all around the world to provide evidence of the physiological effects of energy healing. And I'm not just saying this because it's a promotion, but I have used this practice every single day for 4 years, and personally I've noticed the most impact in my emotional state. This energy practice taught me how to feel energy in my body and observe the sensations. The technique involves you using your hand and connecting to the energy field within your body. And with this gentle, loving awareness that you bring to the table, everything is seen and lived. The whole being comes into alignment. During the birth of my daughter, I tore, and the discomfort that I was experiencing with this tear started to ease up dramatically when I would use this technique. In the show notes, you'll find the link to Evolving Humans so that you can explore this healing technique, which is available through a course that you can join today.
Okay. So, and we've seen this with throughout history. We've just seen them come out with treatments for things rather than solutions to them. Yeah, there are diseases that we have currently that didn't exist 50 or 100 years ago. All right. I mean, SIDS deaths didn't exist. Crohn's disease, you can't find any history of it if you look back prior to like the early 1900s, like mid 1900s. It was when it started. There's no evidence of it in the literature from the 1800s or early 1900s. It's just another example. Now, maybe it was called something else. Maybe it was, but maybe people say, well, they died of other stuff. That's an excuse. That's not an explanation. All right. Because it doesn't make sense that we have diseases now that never existed 100 years ago.
Modern day diseases.
Yeah. But people don't know that because nobody knows medical history.
Right.
Well, there were some really bright people back then. I'm not sure who said it, but there's that famous saying, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Do you remember who said that?
I have no idea who said that, but I have heard that quote.
Well, we're seeing the same things happen over and over and over again. And, it baffles the logical mind as to the way the medical world is right now. And if we bring it back to things like breech delivery, if the medical model, Danielle, we're doing great, then you could say, okay, they're doing great. So who are we to criticize them? But they're defending, they're essentially shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic is what's happening as they come up with new policies and new interventions to try to make things better without ever taking a step back and looking at how nature's designed things. There was this thing recently, and I don't know when this podcast is coming out, so it'll be old news by then, but they did a C-section for a gorilla. I don't know if you saw this.
No, I did not see this.
You're making a face. You
No,
didn't see this, yeah. And it was all over social media. So a couple things. First of all, this makes the news, but the 87 billion gorillas who were delivered vaginally have never made the news before. Maybe they have if it's a zoo and they want to announce that they have a new baby gorilla, but how the baby came into the world was never really a big deal. And now they've had a C-section, and so they made a big deal out of it. But they said they did the C-section because the mother had preeclampsia. So what's interesting to me is, how did they know? Are we taking blood pressures now on
what is going on there?
On gorillas? Are doing prenatal visits on gorillas now? So the whole point of this, what I'm saying is, we've reached a point of absurdity. Everything is sort of upside down and backwards, and interventions are what seem to be excite people in the medical world. And the other thing I talked about the other day with Bliss was, you look at academia, And, you know, what's happened in academia? Well, in order to survive or to get promoted in academia, you have to publish stuff. So they come up with studies and papers that are about either mundane things that don't really mean anything. Like, you know, they'll do a study to tell you it's safer to cross the street when the light is green than when it's red. Like, we really needed a paper for that. But you can get your name on a paper, and that helps to build your resume so that you can. And so they'll do studies on things. And then, of course, some of this stuff is pushed through. And often it's published, and you look at it and you say, how did this ever get through peer review? How did that ever happen? And how did the term breech trial get through peer review? Because when they took a critical look at it afterwards, they published a paper 2 years later that retracted most of the things that were in it, but the damage had been done.
It's already out there.
They included babies in there that weren't breech. They included babies with anomalies. They didn't have any quality control on who was delivering the babies. No standard protocols. They had babies with anomalies, which are all supposed to be excluded. Part of their inclusion criteria was that the baby has a flexed head. Well, 30% of the institutions that did the deliveries didn't have an ultrasound in labor and delivery, so they had no idea if the head was flexed or not. They violated their own protocols, yet this makes it through peer review. And it made it through peer review because of something called confirmation bias. The doctors wanted it published. I don't know why. I don't know why they were suddenly against breech birthing. Like I said, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was considered fun and a variation of normal. But this is what's happening. And so we have academia has been poisoned by the system. Everything has been poisoned by the system. You don't get advanced by not doing stuff, and you certainly get pounded on if you stand up and protest against the system. So every doctor that tries to do things differently in his institution, even if what he's doing is solidly supported by evidence, will upset somebody with more power than they have, and they will come after them. And that's what happens. In my instance, it was actually not even really the OB department that was upset with the way we were practicing, my collaborative midwifery practice and me. It was the anesthesiologists and the pediatricians who really didn't like us very much. Because we didn't ask for epidurals. And because our babies wanted to go home 4 hours after they gave birth, and the pediatricians didn't want to come in and discharge them. And they had a stupid policy that said no baby can go home without being seen by a pediatrician, which is, again, it's a monetary policy, not a scientific policy. And then a lot of our babies didn't want hepatitis vaccine or vitamin K. And that threw the pediatricians into a tiz. And they had a lot of power with the medical executive committee. And this is my story, but I know stories about other colleagues of mine who shall remain nameless on this podcast who have sort of been cast out from the hospital-based birthing world and have charted a different path after that. But they were cast out not because they were bad doctors, not because they had bad outcomes, but because they were doing things differently. And that's the thing that we get back to the beginning of our conversation. I think things are changing.
Yes.
I think the reason that you're seeing a lot of tumult in the medical world is because the apple cart is being upsetting. That's why I said it's the storm before the calm.
Yes.
When some institution or some organization is in its death knells, it doesn't die quietly.
No.
It dies violently usually.
Yeah.
And they push back and push back harder. Again, you have to remember that their interests are not necessarily the interests of the individual family. Now, it should be easy for us to remember that. There are corporate interests, and I understand that. We talked about the fact that the hospital has to keep its doors open. But there's something wrong when they're doing it to the detriment of the population and the people that they're supposed to care for. Whenever I hear a commercial on the radio for a health system or a hospital talking about how much they care and about how we want you to thrive, and the PR department has no connection with the actual institution that they're working for. They're a PR department, right?
Right.
It's
Exactly.
propaganda. We have to stop listening to propaganda, and we have to learn how to discern truth from propaganda.
Oh,
And I think
yeah.
that that's the thing that's coming out more with social media, podcasts like yours, where
Yeah.
people are hearing this stuff and they're beginning to start, they're more than just beginning, but they're questioning now. And this is a good thing. This is how change happens. It doesn't happen fast,
Mm-hmm.
happens slowly. It's unfortunate that how many people will be damaged or injured or suffer depression or feel disempowered or whatever it's going to take before that changes. But
Yeah.
it's beginning to change, and there are more opportunities, and people are beginning to organize and push back. And I admire
Yes.
midwives so much because they have, there are some midwives who've gone the medical route, very much so. Maybe you've covered that, but and the medical organizations and the midwifery organizations have gone very medical
Mm-hmm.
in my country. The ACNM, the American
Yeah.
College of Nurse Midwives, and MEAC, and these other, they've gone very medical. They've changed their terminologies so the people are beginning to say, I've had enough of that.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a weird statistic that has nothing to do with anything, but in my country, people, if the news reporters, which are the laziest bunch of people ever, if the American Medical Association makes a statement, they take that as a representation of what doctors believe.
Mm.
But the truth is, only about 14% of physicians in my country belong to the American Medical Association.
Wow.
And the American Medical Association makes most of its money from selling the coding that we use to bill.
Uh-huh.
The lion's share of their money. They don't even need to be responsive to the few members that they have left. But yet the media doesn't do a deep dive into the fact that the AMA doesn't represent anybody but the AMA.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Because they
and
have
then the
their own
AMA
agenda.
and they got bought off by the CDC and our government to promote this awful product in pregnancy over the last few years. All the organizations have done it. Yours did.
Yeah.
I don't know what goes on. You're in Costa Rica, right?
I'm in Costa Rica now. I haven't lived
Yeah,
in Britain for a long
yeah,
time.
yeah. So, but in other countries too, big organizations have all been bought off. And I don't know how you sell your soul for $1. I just don't understand the leading organizations that represent women, pregnant or doctors representing, taking care of women, has sold out.
Yeah.
And people need to know
I don't
that.
think the majority of people believe that could ever happen either. I think that's where there's like this resistance. And it can be very lonely taking this path, because especially I see it as mothers are stepping into this position of trying to unravel what is happening, trying to get educated, trying to understand themselves on a physiological level, look at the history, and it's a lot like to do. And so I'm so grateful for podcasts, for social media, when we can find people that we can trust who are unraveling this together, so that it's not just one person doing all the work. And because honestly, where the hell would you begin? So it's like slowly just allowing this to, like you said, people are going to be pushing back and it's going to get messy, but it's like holding space for all of it, being able to witness it. And I always find my own anchor is just, what does my body need? Like what is happening physiologically, being with that and understanding that primarily. And then you can clearly start to see where there's money involved within these other different organizations and where the agenda is and how they're trying to manipulate as well. And I also just think it gives space to create questions, like if whoever you're working with, you can create questions that are going to support you to find the answer that is going to serve you and not the system.
Yeah, you just triggered a thought. You triggered a thought in my head. I was going to say, if people don't necessarily have to believe me when I say things like the AMA sold out and stuff like that, they can just Google it.
Yeah,
But then I thought about, can you just Google it anymore?
censored.
Because Google is a money-making corporation, and Google will take the most money it can from people who will pay it the most to whether or not it's money driven to alter their search engines, or whether it's ideologically driven to alter their search engines. You may not be able to find certain things when you just Google it like you used to. Things are changing, and you know, if you talk about, there's a big thing called evidence-based medicine. And evidence-based medicine is a sort of an oxymoron. It's actually not an oxymoron. It's a false premise, because it only is good as the evidence that's used to make the decision that it's evidence-based medicine. And if you're using crappy evidence, it used to be like with what was it with computers or something, garbage in, garbage out, that sort of thing. Yeah. So if you have crappy evidence, or you only have selected evidence by certain organizations that gets put at the top of the search engine, then evidence-based medicine doesn't necessarily mean anything. And with AI coming along, it's all about who controls the AI.
Exactly.
Because
you played around on
AI,
chat GPT?
I mean,
oh my gosh.
we did this. Yeah, we did this on a podcast. Some of our listeners wrote in. They said they asked ChatGPT to describe a home birth, and they asked ChatGPT to describe a hospital birth, and they were the sweetest, most beautiful things that could ever come out of, you know. Yeah, the couple walked in and they just felt so comforted by the scents and the smells in the hospital. This is the Chat GPT, that sort of thing.
Gosh.
So, you know, how are we going to get information in the future?
Right.
And one of the things I would tell your listeners also is that, you know, if someone is giving information that recommends doing less, or somebody's giving information where there's no profit involved, because generally with doing less, there's no profit, I would tend to trust them more than I would trust somebody who has a conflict of interest.
Right.
And there's a lot of, you know, at this point in my career, what's my conflict of interest? I mean, I want to expand my listenership, and we have a Patreon, and I want people to sign up so that I can still make a living.
Yeah.
But I'm not profiting from doing breech birthing anymore. I am profiting from teaching it. And so somebody could say, well, you're only promoting breech so that you can go around and teach it. I'm not getting wealthy doing 12 seminars a year. You know, that's not how it works. So, you know, we're talking about entities that have huge financial stakes in the game. And that's why they want you to take Ozempic, and they don't want you to lose weight and get exercise and eat healthy. You know, this is, I mean, why would they want you to do that? You can't make money off of someone who doesn't need a product.
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful. And when it comes to breech birth, we have to understand that for the doctors, it's about expediency. For the systems, it's about money. But they're not being honest with you. The only consensus, if you look at all breech papers, and Rixa takes deep dives in this, Rixa Fries from Breech Without Borders, and she says the only real consensus in every single paper on breech is that the breech papers will have, on average, a statistically significant lower 1-minute APGAR score. As far as everything else, morbidity, mortality, all that stuff, it doesn't reach statistical significance in almost every paper, except the one they chose to follow, which was the term breech trial. It was the one outlier paper that they chose to follow because it met the desires of the way they wanted to practice. So getting back to breech, if you have a breech birth, first of all, don't worry about it, especially if it's early on in your pregnancy. Don't take all that anxiety and fear that might be projected upon you by your practitioner or by what you've heard, or someone, you know, your mother-in-law or something like that, because that negativity isn't good for you. It isn't good for your developing fetus anyway. So just think positive about it. Realize that, you know, again, you may not have a choice, and you may end up having to have a C-section because that's all that's offered to you. And it isn't safe to have a vaginal delivery with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, because you know, that's foolish. And that gets me to a really strong point that I feel about obstetricians. And I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but my profession is creating its own obsolescence. Because what is the generalist OBGYN? What is the skill that they have that either another specialty or a subspecialist doesn't have? I'm waiting. I'll just be quiet here for a second. Okay. There isn't, except doing a breech birth, putting on forceps, possibly doing a breech extraction or an internal pedalic version on a second twin. Everything else that an obstetrician does can be done by somebody else. Pap smears, well woman exams, gynecologic surgery. Gynecologic oncologists are the best gynecologic surgeons. Most OB residents don't get enough training now in GYN surgery. They have to do a fellowship to get enough surgical training. So a lot of surgeries now are going to the GYN oncologist, even if they're not cancer. If you have endocrine problems, you could see an endocrinologist, or you could see a reproductive endocrinologist. You don't need your OB. If you want to be prescribed birth control pills, you can get that from a nurse practitioner, a midwife, a family doctor, anybody. If you want to catch a baby, a midwife can do that as well as any OB. If you need a C-section, then you could have a general surgeon do that. You could have MFMs can do that. Family practitioners can do that. So I'm not saying, again, there aren't enough of those people to go around right now. But I'm saying that if you don't know how to do breech birth or breech extraction, then this is how I feel. You cannot call yourself an obstetrician. You can come up with a different word, call yourself something else. But you're not an obstetrician. Because in order to take care of women, you need to be able to take care of almost all women. And if you take a term, 3% are breech, 3% are twins. So 6 to 7% of all women at term are going to have something that you're not an expert at. I think that's, if I did my math right, that's about 1 out of 15. Okay. So about 1 out of every 15 women that come into your practice, you're not an expert at. What other specialty would tolerate that? And my good friend Milo Chavira, colleague of mine, he's a maternal fetal medicine specialist, said something recently on the Evidence-Based Birth podcast, which I keep repeating now because it's brilliant. And I kick myself for not thinking it myself. But if you're an internist, Danielle, and you have a woman that comes into your practice who's having chest pain or exercise-induced angina or something like that, you're going to probably refer them to a cardiologist. And if you have a woman that comes into your practice who's got a rash on her body that's all over her body, all you know from medical school is if it's wet, dry it. If it's dry, wet it. That's your entire dermatology training. Okay. You don't know what it is. You're going to probably refer that woman to a dermatologist because you're not an expert in those things. So when an OB gets a woman that comes in that's breech, why don't they refer them to a breech expert? But they don't. They don't even think about it because they consider themselves to be experts. And so they'll just tell them that the only safe thing to do is have a C-section. That's what they'll tell them.
It's like this complex. Or is it the money again? Like which side of it is?
It's, you know what? It's not the money. I don't really believe it's the money because they don't make that much off of any given woman. I think it's ego. And I think it's also in the way they're indoctrinated. They're not even indoctrinated to think out of the box.
Mm.
They don't consider themselves not experts in obstetrics, but they're not experts.
Right.
I haven't done laparoscopic surgery in 13 years. I'm still a gynecologist, but if somebody came to me with an ectopic pregnancy and I was still practicing, I went back to practicing tomorrow, would I suggest that I'm the one to do their surgery? No, I would not. Because I haven't done it. I'm not an expert in it anymore. These guys haven't done breech delivery probably ever, and if not, at least since their residency. So of course they're not experts, and they're not expected to be experts on it, but they should then refer them to somebody who is, because it's a reasonable choice. By every standard that we go through of ethics.
Yes.
Giving women the reasonable choices and letting them decide is our ethical obligation. And to violate your ethical obligation every single day must take its toll on people. So they do what's called cognitive dissonance. They don't look at themselves and say, geez, what am I doing is wrong? I have a 35% C-section rate in my practice. Do I really believe that 1 out of every 3 women can't deliver her baby as nature intended and that 40% of them need to be induced? And they're going to say to themselves, probably, yeah, I believe that. Because the alternative is really unthinkable.
Right.
That they know they're doing something that's wrong and unethical and they're doing it anyway.
Yes. Yes.
So if breech birth is a reasonable option, then women should have that choice. And if choices are limited in your community because no one knows how to do it, I understand that. But don't skew your counseling to tell them their only reasonable choice is a cesarean section. Tell them it's the only option that you can offer them. But there are people around the state or the country or the city or whatever who you should have a consult with. Reach out to them, have a consult with them, have a discussion with them, and look at midwives who know how to do breech if it's legal in my state, like Arizona or other states around me right now. Utah, you can have a breech birth at home with a midwife. California, you can't. And then have a conversation with them. And if you really like your doctor, then the doctor should say, well, have a conversation with them, come back and let's talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be good practice. That would be good ethical practice.
Is there a place where we can find all these breech birth experts?
Yeah, there is. I was working on one, but then Rixa beat me to it. So if you go to Breech Without Borders website, all you have to do is sign up. You give them their email, so you get on their mailing list. It's kind of we all do that sort of thing, an enticement. You don't have to pay anything for it. And then they have a breech practitioner finder. I don't know if it's worldwide yet. I haven't looked at it recently, but she's building on it. And anybody who knows somebody who's breech can email me or email Rixa at Breech Without Borders, and we'll add them to the list. It didn't seem reasonable for me to make one once she already had one. It's like, why reinvent the wheel? So, and that's right up her alley. I'm not really good at spreadsheets. Rixa is a genius at spreadsheets. We've worked on our papers together. We've done, screen sharing, and she'll be like, I'm still like on step 1 and she's on step 17 because she's so fast. So I leave that up to her. Yeah, so they can go to Breech Without Borders. I mean, there used to be a Facebook group. God, I forgot what it was called. But they haven't updated it in years. And if you actually looked where they had a pin for me, and my pin was in the off the coast of California in the Pacific Ocean. I used to love that I was in the Pacific
swimming
Ocean.
To you.
Right.
Swimming over.
So yes, but that's where you can do that. And not every country probably has that option. And a lot of people are financially, they can't go outside of their network. But you have to think about it. Maybe you should. And maybe you should plan ahead before you're even pregnant of saving some money, putting some money aside, just in case you have to go out of network or you have to do something else that you can't say, because this choice, you can't say that I can't do it because I don't have the money, because this choice will be with you the rest of your life.
Yes.
And and I know that how a woman gives birth is with them forever.
And then onto their child too. Let's pass it through the generations.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, and we want women to have good memories. We wanted, we have a rise in postpartum depression. Right? Everybody says that. So what are they coming out with? They came out with a new medication for postpartum depression.
Right.
That's what they came out with. Instead of asking the question, why are we having such a rise in postpartum depression? And there's lots of different reasons, and a lot of them are solvable.
Yeah. Yeah.
The system that I was part of, that still exists today, pretty much is you deliver your baby in a hospital, you go home on day 2, and the doctor says, I'll see you in 6 weeks. And that's what happens. And they're left to fend on their own and figure this out their own and find their own lactation consultant or find their own support system or find the midwifery model. That doesn't happen. The midwives stay with you. They're 24/7 on the phone. By the way, when you call your midwife, unless they're in a large group, you're going to speak to your midwife. When you call your doctor, there are rare doctors like me who are solo practitioners, but most doctors are in a large group. You're going to reach somebody who has no connection to you whatsoever, doesn't know you, and probably going to tell you, this isn't something I can deal with. Call Dr. Smith on Tuesday, and they're going to leave you hanging because again, they're not comfortable dealing with issues like postpartum depression, that sort of thing. We're not trained in that stuff. We don't get the training. OBs don't get the training in that. We're very well trained medically.
And it's not something that can just go away quickly. It's like it is a digging deep and looking at different layers. So it's the tablet is like, okay, that's done. What's the next thing? And this is like
Yeah,
the world that we live in, right? It's like fast
yeah,
paced, get everything done.
I get messages weekly from medical students or people contemplating going to medical school or even nursing school, becoming a CNM, and they want to know, how can I navigate through that and keep my sanity?
Mm.
Because I'll tell you, nobody goes to medical school and residency in OBGYN to become out to be somebody who's short, ill-tempered, condescending. That's that's not what that's not how the person that they were when they
Yes.
started. And yet somehow during those 8 years of training or 3 or 4 years of nursing school and then midwifery school, you get indoctrinated to think in a different way, and you get beat up and you come out. And I often say that when you hear stories of a woman telling them how they were, cut short by their doctor, they were not respected by their doctor didn't make eye contact. The doctor only gave them 2 minutes to ask a question. They left the office feeling worse than they did before they came in. That nobody's happy in that system. And I can tell you that happy people don't talk to women like that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. And we're not just talking, again, when I was training, most OBs were male. Now almost all of them are female.
Mm-hmm.
And female doctors are just as short and just as irritable and just as annoying as male doctors ever were. So it's not a sex thing at all. It's an indoctrination thing. And again, we've touched on all kinds of different flaws in the way the medical system is, which is why it cannot last. The problem is they're going down swinging,
It's sick.
and
There's
getting an alternative for women who need choices is going to be hard to do because they have the power. They're the ones that can lobby their state legislatures or your country's government to put certain restrictions in place that make them more profitable and make it harder to compete with them.
Mm.
This is what big business does. It's not evil. That's what big business is. All right.
Yes.
Big business is no less tyrannical than big government. It's just that big business can't repossess your house. They can't arrest you.
Yeah.
But other than that, they can be just as tyrannical as big government.
Mm.
And this is why things have to change. And I think that, again, I'm honored again to be on your show because to get the word out there about this, because I know that when you interview me, I've listened to some of your other podcasts. I'm not your typical guest. I'm not. Usually your stuff is much more scrunchy.
It's like there's also responsibility, isn't there, with putting these episodes out when having guests on as well, of like who comes on to what to share, because there's a trust as well when you have people listening, signing up to your stuff. And it's like being very careful because everybody's who's sharing it's their opinion through their perspective, and it's rooted in what they think is what they think is truth. It's a very interesting one coming to the table to share this, because it is, if there's a following of somebody with an intention that is not to serve the mothers and the children and the families and humanity in general, it's really scary what can be put out through social media and podcasts and things like that.
Yeah, it is. And that's why, how you filter things is, we're not taught that either. Just like OBs are not taught about mammalian birth and normal birth or nutrition or breastfeeding or anything like that. We're not taught how to navigate media.
Yes.
You have to understand that media is a business, and what they want are clicks, which is why we talk about C-sections for gorillas. Right? Like who really cares that they did a C-section on a gorilla?
Oh my gosh.
I can't get that out.
Right?
I can't get that image out of my head that they were
You've
taking
seen
a
it?
birth.
I want to watch it.
Yeah, I've seen the video of the baby it doesn't even look like it's that premature.
Really?
I don't know why she couldn't have just been induced.
I'm surprised this hasn't been all over my social media. I'm so like so surprised.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
it's
just
been on your side. It's probably gone through
just
your
go
network.
to YouTube and put in gorilla C-section and it'll come up. But it brings me back to the point that media is a business, and how do you navigate them? I mean, Bliss and I are we're sometimes on different sides of the aisle on certain issues,
Yeah.
and so but we overcome that with our affection and our respect for each other.
That's
And some of
beautiful.
the issues we obviously don't talk about because we don't want to piss off half our audience.
Right, right. That's it as well.
We
Totally.
don't.
It's like caring
But
for that baby, like you have created this, and it's like nourishing that and the people who are with you too.
yeah, but if you only watch CNN,
Right.
then you never know what a conservative media source is going to say. And if people only watched Fox News, they're never going to know. Well, they probably will know anyway because the culture is inundated with the other side, because all the other media and pretty much is sort of left wing. But if you just, and everybody stays in their bubble because it's uncomfortable to read news that's makes you feel edgy and uncomfortable. Nobody wants that. I'm not a big fan of heavy metal music, so I choose no heavy metal in my playlist. Okay. So, I mean, why would I put heavy metal music in my playlist if I don't like it? Okay. So that's a typical example of our biases affecting us, and we don't know what we don't know, and if we can't learn it, and we're not being taught it anymore, because whoever runs these institutions doesn't want you to know it, you have to dig deep to find it. So
Yes.
again, the rules are, if you trusted a source and they've lied to you, openly lied to you, they can make mistakes. Mistake is fine. A mistake is turning left when you meant to turn right.
Yeah.
Okay. But lying is completely different. And,
Yes.
like if a doctor tells you that, oh, if you breech birth is going to your baby's head's going to get stuck and the baby's going to die, that's a lie. I mean, he may believe it, but it doesn't make any less of a lie. So, so if you're in a
That's it.
situation where people are lying to you, don't trust them anymore.
Yeah.
So find your
Yes.
independent sources. And I'll tell you, independent journalists are the best way to find information. Like you. I mean, we're not really technically journalists, but we
I'll
are
take it.
in a way now. We're podcasters. It depends what our agenda is. But if you go to Substack, or you go to a place where people are writing and they're not working for a corporation and they don't have a master,
Yes.
they don't have a boss or an employer that tells them what they can and cannot say. And this is the real problem with institutions, with academia and whatever else, because if you, like we talked about earlier, if you rock the boat, you're going to get demoted or not promoted or fired or lose your Christmas bonus or something like that because you spoke out. So you end up skewing your information to funnel the people you are advising down a path that the institution wants them to take, as opposed to what's your ethical obligation. And it's hard. It's lovely to be free. It's harder sometimes. Certainly, it's less secure than having a job, paying for your insurance and your pension, and giving you a shift and your working hours, and then when you're off, you're off. Midwifery burnout and solo doctor burnout is high because you're on call all the time. The reason I finally gave up medicine after almost 40 years was because I got really, really tired of being on call 24/7. And it was not that I got called every night. It's just that I went to bed every night not knowing if I'd be called or not.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really, it wears
Always
on. Right.
Yeah, I was a nurse too, and this was for 8 years, and I can resonate with a lot of the things, just not being able to show up in full authenticity, and that almost killing me. That's why I had to leave. So my daughter is coming because she wants me now. Let me say hi to Dr. Stu.
Yeah, I want to say hi.
Say
This
hi.
is
Let me turn this up. Say
is this the
hi.
same one that was here before?
Can you see?
Is this the same one that was on before?
Yeah, I just have one. Let me turn my, oh, there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's 3, almost 3. Come and put your face near mine, then you can see it.
Hi.
Say hi.
I like your pigtails. They look great. You got more hair than I got. Look, I have no hair. What happened to my hair? Where did it go?
Where did it go? Where did his hair go?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has grown so much this last year, so I'll send you some through in the post if you want. She's got lots of hair now. Would you be able to share where the listeners can find you and talk about, and if also just share about your because I know you're doing in-person teaching, so if you can just share about where they're based
Yeah.
as well, and I'll just mute myself.
Okay. All right. So I'm wrapping up because we had an interloper into the podcast. Uh, where people can find me, my website is birthinginstincts.com. And on my website, there's an events page that people can click on. And what will come down will be where I'm going to be teaching or speaking next. And it's pretty much the whole calendar year. And I teach a 2-day breech and twin seminar. We generally have between 15 and 25 attendees, mostly midwives. I would love to have doctors come. And we do hands-on training as well as lectures and, as I said, storytelling. But the hands-on is great. And I would tell you that most attendees who leave are not going to be experts in breech birth or twin birth, but they're going to have the skills to know what to do. And one of my favorite things that happens to me is when I get an email from somebody who says, Dr. Stu, I took your course last August and we had a surprise breech this morning and I knew exactly what to do. And more importantly, Dr. Stu, I knew exactly what not to do. I knew how to keep my hands to myself and the baby was rotating perfectly and did everything fine. I didn't have to do anything. Or I had to do this or that or the other thing and the maneuvers that we taught. So that it's a very important thing and it can save a life. And there's no reason that every physician shouldn't know how to do this. It's a sin that that residency programs and those directors of those programs are not teaching this skill. And we talked about that earlier about what I think an obstetrician really is. So that's one way you can reach me. We have the Birthing Instincts podcast on any of your routine podcast apps. And we have a website for that called birthinginstinctspodcast.com, surprisingly. And at Instagram, I'm at Birthing Instincts. So it's a pretty easy find for me. And then we now, my co-host Bliss Young and I have started a Patreon, which you can find either on my Instagram link tree, or you can find it on the Birthing Instincts podcast website, a link to it. And you can sign up, and for a small fee per month, we're doing a lot of extra content. We're having some live events. We are we have information on there that you can use. We have guides to questions to ask your OB or how to handle a situation where you're in the hospital and they're trying to bully you into doing something, that sort of thing, and what your rights are. So we're going to be adding content. And I love it because every now and then I just have a thought in my attic up here that I feel like I want to get out. So now I can just record it and I can just send it to my assistant Raquel, who then will post it on for our Patreon members. I just love having a podcast because it's a way for me to vent every week. And Bliss keeps me in line, and Bliss adds so much because she's got so much wisdom. So that's I guess where you find that's where you find us. I would love to meet anybody who found me from this podcast. Please, if you run into me at a seminar or something, please tell me and let me know. Okay.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And I'm curious, in your Patreon, are you going to be doing live gatherings as well so people can like ask questions and stuff?
Yeah, we do. We're going to do a monthly, I think it's going to be a monthly Q&A. So you'll just have to check the Patreon schedule. And then we also do one every other month, we do something where Bliss and I talk for about a half an hour and then we take questions, and it's called Bringing the Home Birth Hesitant on Board. And we want families to come on if, say, the woman wants to have a home birth, but the husband is sort of nervous about it, or the mother-in-law is nervous about it, or whatever. They're welcome to come on and ask questions so that we can try to dispel misinformation and rumors, and also be honest about what the risks are and what the benefits are, and also explain what some of the risks are of going to the hospital. The hospital is not the default position for safety.
Yes.
So we'll just leave it at that, because that's a whole nother.
You're like, I'm going back in.
Yeah, I'm not going back in. Right.
Thank
So
you.
you can, yeah. So that's what I would say is again, don't be scared of breech. Be upset that your choices are limited, but don't be scared of breech. Your baby isn't foolish, and breech birth is essentially the same safety as head down in skilled hands.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and being here with us. And it's been great to see you again. So we hope that you have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so, so much.